So welcome to everyone. We got a lot of people still coming, and that's really good. So it's really good to be with the Association of Leaders in Lifelong Learning for Ministry. You should know that my graduate work is in adult education. So I really appreciate the opportunity to work with people like you who appreciate and understand good learning, especially for adults. Josh asked me today to talk about evaluation planning, and that's pretty much what we're going to talk about in terms of putting together a strategy for how you will evaluate a program or a series of programs. When I hear lifelong learning, a lot of times I think about programs that people can audit in theological schools, or people who go back to school later in their life who want to learn about something they missed when they were in school. So lifelong learning is a very important thing. And it's also very important in terms of ongoing formation from a religious perspective. I have 3 aims with you today, and if you have others, I would certainly invite them. I want to, first of all, introduce the purpose and benefit of evaluation and evaluation planning. Evaluation is not a long-term, one-time event. I'd like to suggest to you that it is a process of planning out a series of questions that you want to have answered because of the programs that you offer. Secondly, I'd like to introduce the value and benefit of articulating a theory of change. A theory of change really talks about the conditions that you hope to change in a person or in an organization because of the programs that you offer them. And then lastly, I'd like to introduce some resources and processes for back home application. But more importantly, as I said earlier, I really welcome your questions and your needs as we go through this. So feel free to stop me at any time. So the question that I'd like to ask you first, and maybe write it down, and we'll look at what the chat is saying, is when you hear the word evaluation, what comes to mind? And if you'd use the chat, I'd like to just see what comes out of that. What comes to mind when you think about evaluation? One word or phrase, and put it in the chat. Rating, assessment. How did we do? Ongoing, assessment, checkup, judging the worth of something, adjustments, making better, good, improvement, intentional, systemic, ongoing process of trying to make things better, measurement. Did we do what we said we were going to do? Efficacy. Anything else? Did I miss any? Learning about learning. Wonderful. Planning for improvement. Did we achieve our desired incomes? And how do we know? What evidence do we have? Very good. So I'm going to go back to screen share here. So what I'd like to suggest to you is much of what you already put into the chat, that when you hear the word evaluation, I'd like to suggest that it's about learning from our work. Your work being the programs that you offer to the many audiences or clients that are part of your organization. And by learning, it's different than judging or grading, as some of you had suggested. And many of us have some not so good stories in the past about either being personally evaluated or grading. And that pretty much sets up a tone that evaluation is hard work, and evaluation is going to judge whether or not my program, your programs, are beneficial to others. But I'd like to suggest that for our purposes today, we look at evaluation as learning from our work. In essence, evaluation answers 2 big questions. How has our work made a difference in the lives of our clients and our institutions? And how do we know? And the how do we know is the evidence that you would collect through good evaluation practices. You may be, I apologize, I have a puppy and he's acting up right at the moment that I'm giving this presentation. How has your work, your programs changed people in some way? And we'll talk about that in just a moment in terms of what kind of change or impact are we looking at. But how has your work made a difference in the lives of clients and your institutions? Much of your work is going to benefit the organization or institute in which you reside. And they should be very curious and knowledgeable about the importance of lifelong learning as well. So we're going to talk about how to answer both of these questions. Evaluation planning, from my perspective, is designing an appropriate evaluation strategy in order to gain a body of knowledge that will not only improve the work, but be of value to those who care deeply about what you're doing. It's not only for yourselves, is what I'm suggesting, but from time to time, you may have a story of change of a client or an organization that you'd like to publish out there, literally an article or a story or a talk or whatever it might be. Your programs, my guess would be, have an important impact on people. And the more that you can tell the stories of change in terms of what it has meant for someone, that will be to your benefit as well. And it not only serves as a way to market your programs in particular. When I look at programs, and I've been looking at, I was working with 2 grantees today. One was a very well-established program, and one is just getting started. And so both of them were asking me, well, what kind of evaluation do we look at, given where we are in our process? So let's look at this. When your program is being developed, when you're, whatever it is you're going to present, it's in a design phase. You're exploring and creating and emerging questions, challenges, opportunities continue to come up. In this kind of development, I would suggest to you that the kind of evaluation we want to look at is typically called formative evaluation, really saying, is this working or not working? And the questions you answer to a client or to an audience will be, to what degree was this program beneficial to you? To what degree was this program helpful? Did you receive what you were expecting? Things like that. Those kinds of answers from those clients will help you go back, just as some of you just said in the chat, to go back and do program improvement. That's a very important part of any kind of evaluation, is looking at how do we improve the program based on what people are saying to us. So early in program development and design, we look at doing formative kinds of evaluation. As the program develops, you continue to improve based on your evaluations. You may enhance some things, add some things to your program. It may become standardized. And the context out of which you're working becomes increasingly well known and understood, meaning you understand what it is the audience is looking for. And you design the program, or perhaps continue to design other programs based on what they are saying to you. And then finally, the program at some point could be stabilized and well established. It's mature, it's predictable about how the audience will accept it. It is sustainable, and I could do a whole nother workshop on sustainability. It's not just the funding side, but it's also how the program can be sustained through good planning, through good partnerships, through good marketing, other kinds of institutions that could work with you, etc. So there's, in that case here, we're probably looking at more or less impact and summative evaluation. Impact being, what difference did this make and how do we know? The questions I just posed to you, and measuring that through a variety of methodologies that I'll go through in just a moment. So I'm not sure where all of you are. My guess is many of you are in the center or beyond in terms of your program design, but you want to design evaluation based on where you are in your program development. One of the things I talk to grantees over and over again is to create in your evaluation work a culture of inquiry. That is asking really good questions about your program. Not whether, if you do an in-person workshop, whether the room was well ventilated, or whether people enjoyed the breaks and the food and all that sort of thing. Excuse me. But whether or not this made a difference, how do we know? And to frame questions for yourself that cannot be answered by yes or no, but questions that ask why, how, or what in framing your evaluation questions. So this kind of questioning becomes very important as you stand back from your program design. What is it you want to know about what difference that program made to the audience? From that, then you move in this culture of inquiry to investigating. And I'll talk about methodologies in just a moment, but what are the various ways that we can go around and seek information that will help answer our questions? It could be a survey. It could be observation, which is a very important part of evaluation. It could be interviews, whether it's personal or group. There's a variety of ways to measure and answer the questions that you're curious about. Once you receive that information, then my hope would be that you, along with others in your organization, sit down and look at that data, look at that information, and reflect on what is it saying to us about the benefit and the value of the programs we're offering, and where, in fact, do we need to improve. This kind of culture of inquiry, of investigating, reflecting, and improving is really, really essential to evaluation planning. And one thing I will overemphasize to anyone that I'm working with is evaluation should not be just at your feet. You should have a group of people, a trusted group of people that can work with you on asking the kinds of questions that are needed in good evaluation, helping you with the design of how you're going to go about finding that information, whether it's surveys or interviews, and then sitting down with you literally for a length of time to reflect on it so that you can go back and improve the program. Later on, as time goes on, as we just said, to really share with others outside of your organization the benefits of the programs that you're offering. As I said earlier, it's also a very good way to market your program through articles or stories that you're able to tell. And then eventually, we want to have some kind of sustainability over time with your program, because you know what works and what doesn't work. So creating a culture of inquiry becomes really essential in this evaluation work. So what I'd like to do is just give you a moment to reflect on these kinds of questions. How do you define success of your program? What single change do you hope to see in your client or your audience as a result of your program? What single change do you hope to see in ministry? Because many of you obviously are connected to ministry in a variety of ways. And as important, what single change do you hope to see in your institution? Just take a moment to think about that. And we'll come back and see what some of you are saying at that point. Just take those questions and reflect on them for just a moment. So let me just come back to all of you for just a moment. How do you define success? Anybody want to put it in the chat, or if you want to call it out? Do you define success? I'm going to see if anybody has their hand up. Well, let's go on to the next question then. What single change do you hope to see in your client or your audience? Mission fulfillment, which we measure by program learning outcomes. Thank you, Cheryl. It makes a difference. And Valerie indicates, kind of goes with question number 2, life changes, application of the learning. Confidence that they can lead rather than reticence. These are the kinds of questions that I encourage you to think about in terms of what difference your program is going to make to those audiences that you're working with. Let me go back to my. So I do want to talk to you, as Josh said, about a theory of change, because that's where this conversation is leading us in terms of a theory of change. And it talks about what we do in our program and what will change as a result of our program, as a result of presenting it. And I'm going to show you another document. This is a very generic theory of change. This just talks about what goes into a theory of change. And by definition, it's the systematic linkages that align the program's overall strategy with an overarching goal to achieve something of lasting value. And in this particular theory of change that I was working with, congregation members leading lives of meaning and purpose. This was an important initiative of Lilly Endowment, where they engaged congregations in leading different kinds of faith formation programs. But a theory of change, theoretically, talks, first of all, we start here. What do we invest in? We invest in staff and volunteers, time, money, research, materials, equipment, technology, or perhaps even other partners. And what you do, and that's what all of you do, you conduct workshops, You deliver services. You may very well develop products or curriculum resources as a result of your programs. You may indeed train people. From time to time, you provide counseling. You may fund, you may facilitate, especially in your program presentations, and you may partner with others. So we invest what we do in who you reach. These are your various audiences, whoever they may be. You know who your particular audiences are based on the kinds of programs that you offer. But here is where the theory of change and the signs of success that I just asked you about really become important. It does look very linear, but a program most of the time has some short-term results about learning. I was working with a grantee today that is going to give a series of modules to pastors about pastoral leadership. So obviously, the first thing is that they're going to learn about leadership. So hopefully in those early modules that they are going to offer, there's going to be a greater awareness of what leadership is about. They're going to access some new knowledge. It might change their attitudes. It might build their skill levels. They may form opinions about leadership, and it might encourage them and inspire them to really work at different parts of leadership that they may not be completely familiar with. And it obviously is motivating. So the first thing that happens anytime any of us go into a program, especially a lifelong learning program, is we learn something. And then after that, as some of you were saying in the chat, it has the impact of changing our own behaviors, perhaps changing our practices, or we gain new practices. It might help us make decisions about the future. In some cases, not always, it might help form policies. And in other ways, it might help people move into social action, especially programs that are networked with a lot of the social issues in our world today. But the ultimate impact really is larger than just the person, larger than just the organization. It could change conditions socially, economically, civically, environmentally, as well as in the context of church. So do know that your programs follow this theory of change, whether or not you're aware of it. But my work with grantees, for the most part, is helping them put together a theory of change, because then what we do is we go back to this column right here on learning, and we begin to frame our evaluation questions from this first column. Once we have that information and data back, then we can go back in a year or two and say, okay, what actions did that client or that audience undertake as a result of what they learned? Did they change? Did they do anything with that information? So theory of change becomes essential to good evaluation planning. I'm going to get out of this and go back to this. Here's a sample of what an evaluation plan might look like, and it might go on for at least 1 or 2 pages. But I'm using something that I used with a grantee, and this was called To Lives and Meaning and Purpose. And the question that they framed in their culture of inquiry was, how does the practice of writing verbatims deepen one's vocational discernment? And their source would be obviously the students that they were working with. And their method was going to be personal interviews. And the person responsible would be whoever on your staff could undertake that work. And then, of course, a target date to when they wanted to have it done. Another question they asked was, how is mentorship complementing our mission of framing lifelong disciples? And again, they turned to students and to mentors. They used a survey followed by group interviews. And here, using mixed methods of evaluation methodologies is really very effective. So to do a survey and then to follow up with group interviews. Now, some groups like to do interviews first and then follow it up with a survey to document what they heard, to substantiate it. But this is very effective to do multiple methodologies. And obviously, they have a person responsible and a timeline for doing it. But this is the kind of thing that you would do in developing an evaluation plan. So what are the methodologies? Lately, I've been working with a lot of groups that are doing pre and post inventories. So the pre obviously helps you understand who is your audience and at what level are they entering into your program, what body of knowledge do they already have, so that you don't replicate something that they don't need at this point. And then obviously post inventories down the road really help you understand, was there progress in their learning? And most of the time in a pre and post inventory strategy, you're using some of the same questions, maybe reframed and reworked just a little bit in the post inventory. But for the most part, you're looking at asking the same questions over time to see if there's movement in one's learning. We've talked about surveys. We just did in that last slide. The importance of surveys. Most of them these days are done online, very few pencil and paper. Interviews, both focus groups as well as personal. Obviously, this is time consuming and labor intensive. You not only have to do the interviews, but then you have to thematically read what comes out of that narrative that you captured. Most of the time, people record interviews for that purpose. Another way is observation. I said this earlier. This is a really important part of evaluation. If you're in a room and you're giving a program, watching the reaction of the group in the room is essential, especially the nonverbals. When do they lean into the information? When are they checking out? When do they go back on their phones? That sort of thing. All the nonverbals that you can capture. And I can send Josh, if you would like access to it, an observation grid where it helps you look at the kinds of things that are going on in the room. One thing I would say, however, is if you're going to do observation, there should be at least 2 or 3 of you doing it together so that you can bring your different perspectives and observations together at the end. We all have a different way of looking at situations, and it's always best to have other people join you in that process. Another way is testimonies. Lately, I've been working with a lot of grantees on journaling, asking their clients to journal about something that they learned, and then asking permission and maintaining confidentiality to read those journal entries to see what is coming out thematically from all of them as you read them. Another one that's very, very labor intensive is a case study where you would follow a client or follow a group of people over time and asking some questions about the impact of your program on that particular organization or institution. And then also any kind of existing information and data that you collect from your audience as they register, as you talk with them. A lot of that is profile information, the demographics, the cultural information, language barriers, their learning needs, all of that becomes really essential in helping you understand how you can better serve through your particular programs. I want to talk just briefly about the role of evaluation in sustainability. Like I said earlier, it can be a program of its own, talking about sustainability, but it becomes very essential if you want to ensure that your programs can endure over time. Do know, and I think you all know this, that programs are interventions for creating change. You are offering your audience something to take hold of, to reflect on, and then decide for themselves, discern for themselves, to what degree is that program making a difference in my life or can make a difference in my life. Evaluation reveals the merit, the worth, or the benefit of the program over time. Some of you actually put that in the chat, and I was really pleased to see that. Do know that evaluation is dynamic, meaning it's continuous learning. You are always asking these questions about what works or doesn't work within a program and scaling it appropriately. And then sustainability is the ability to endure over time. As I said earlier, it's dynamic, not static. And it's also the ability of the organization that you are part of to produce a particular desired outcome. And then lastly, and then we'll go into questions that you may have of me that I'd be more than delighted to answer. As an adult learner, I'm not sure many of you are familiar with this. I would hope many of you are, but the cone of learning really helps with your evaluation work and in particular program improvement. And this cone of learning starts with most people remember 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, and 30% of what they see. But if you begin to look at what they see and hear and combine that, then they will retain it mostly 50% of the time. They will, 70% of those people will retain what they say and what they write. That's why journaling becomes very important. And 90% are very experiential. And I love, from adult education perspective, providing experiences in the room out of which they can apply in their own life. So designing presentations where they can do the real thing. But I find this cone of learning really helpful when I'm working with a grantee, because then we look at their program and say, okay, our program improvement looks like we need to engage people in the lower half of this triangle. Getting them involved, doing some experiential things, getting them to write and reflect. So it's just not a presentation. I'm going to stop screen share for just a moment. And yes, Karen, we will get you that observation grid. So I want to see what your questions are and go from there. I really gave you a very theoretical presentation, obviously, because I wasn't sure what you were looking for or how I could help you. What is the difference between interview and testimony? Is a testimony open-ended and the person gets to choose what she shares with the evaluator? An interview are predetermined questions by you. And they are questions where you are really inquiring about what difference something made to that person. Testimony is really the person themselves standing up in front of a group and saying what difference this made to them. We won't know what they're going to say, but they have indicated that they have changed as a result of a program, and you invite them to either stand in front of the group or in a Zoom room like we're in to really express what difference this made as a result of being part of a program. What else do you have? Josh, I can't see if there's hands up because there's two screens here. So if your hand is up, please interrupt us.
If I see any, I'll let you know.
Okay. It seems like this is from Timothy. It sounds like medium and long-term evaluation might be more challenging to do. Yes and no. That's why evaluation, Timothy, becomes very important. One of the things that I worry about all the time with the groups that I work with is evaluation fatigue. We cannot keep going back to them with questions after questions or surveys after surveys or another focus group. You really want to be strategic. And as you get in, once you have done program improvement from your formative evaluation, then later your evaluation work is probably going to be less, would be my hope. And you're really beginning to explore impact. What difference did it make? From your perspective, are evaluation and assessment identical? If not, how do you distinguish? I don't see the rest of that. Okay. Dallas Stanley Green, I would say evaluation, again, is learning from our work. Assessment in many cases is measuring something, like measuring your outcomes. To what degree did you learn this or that? Usually assessment flows right out of the outcomes that you've identified. Evaluation flows out of the questions that you yourself frame that you want to know in terms of what difference does it make. So I do make a little bit of distinction with that. Mary Ellen?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was late. I totally missed when this started. So I'm catching up. I have a question. So how would you evaluate? So I work in formation, so spiritual and human formation. How would you evaluate what I would think, like how do you, I don't know if you can really assess or evaluate someone's spirituality if it's personal. But I've been asked by our committee on assessment how I evaluate our students in those areas. And I'm just wondering if there's another way. We do interviews. So, but all of that is not, it's not on paper like data that way. So.
Thank you, Mary Ellen, for that very difficult question. I would say personal spirituality is obviously a personal thing. And I'd have to sit down and talk with you more about your program and what you're doing. But I think what you want to know in particular is the person, depending on how they interpret spirituality, doing something in their spiritual life. Are they developing their own spiritual life in some way? It may not be the way that you or I would assume it should be, but are they doing something? Are they taking on practices? Are they reading particular books? Are they seeing people, not necessarily a spiritual director, but are they talking to people about faith and spirituality in some way? And I think that question becomes more and more important, especially when working with young adults, because they interpret spirituality much different than some of us who were brought up in different ways about what spirituality means. So I'd love to, it would be helpful to sit with you and talk about ways that you could measure that. My guess is you can't do that in a survey, but you could do it in some really well-crafted questions in a personal interview, and then ask that over time to a number of people and just see what comes out of that. But that's a really hard thing to measure, because we all have in our minds what is spirituality. And I think it really challenges to be open into how people interpret that today.
Right.
It helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Oh, good. Okay. So David Wang from Fuller is doing a major research project on measuring that. Are there any standardized instruments for measuring spiritual fulfillment? I don't know, but I think I might go to Kathleen Cahalan up at St. John's and ask her. She was in my role prior, and she may know of some, but I'm not aware of any, but I would think there are some out there. I know there has been a lot of research lately on spirituality of young adults in particular, and how their view of God and any practices that they take on. Other questions you may have? From Jill, I run a lay leadership program at a seminary and also do congregational consulting. I started by doing paper surveys, which was great. Then as we went over to Zoom about 5 years ago, we had trouble getting people to fill out electronic surveys. I rely now more on conversation and observation. What results did you achieve? What changes did you make? What impact have you made on your faith community or your community around you? Those are great questions. The one thing when I read questions like that, I would want to collect that information over time from a variety of people, and then stand back and thematically read what comes out of asking that same set of questions with a number of people. Really important and very good. Pre and post assessments would seem to be helpful for self-assessment of spiritual formation, right? You could definitely do something pre in terms of how they understand spirituality, their understanding of God in their life, what kinds of formation they had prior to coming into your program, and then after your program, measuring where they are now as a result. I'm going to show you, as you're thinking about any other questions, I have one more thing I want to share with you. If I can find it. No, I can't find it. I lost it. Let's see here. Here's an evaluation I just worked with a group on. And this was something after the program. It was a one-time thing. This is very generic for your purposes. But the one question that we are asking and we're very curious about is, what are the most important things that happened during this meeting or this seminar for you? What do you feel you accomplished or gained through your investment of time here? There's no way you're going to get the same set of answers from everybody in the room, but you will get a really important narrative from a question like that. For this purpose, in what ways did it matter that the group included other young adults your age? Or you could ask, in what ways did it matter that the group was intergenerational or intercultural, or where English was not the first language? That second question you could modify to serve your particular purposes. How was this meeting or gathering similar to meetings or gatherings you've had in the past in your congregation with your family? How was it different? What did you personally or most enjoy or find life-giving about this gathering or this seminar? Again, you're not going to get the same answers from everyone. And this is another question that we asked. This was obviously a young adult group. In what ways, if any, will the discussion today be helpful to you as you complete high school and begin to discern your future? And this is the second question under number 5 becomes very important, because all of us come into any kind of program with expectations. We expect we're going to hear something or learn something or gain something as a result of participating. So what do you wish you had a chance to do or discuss, but you did not? This is really an essential question for program improvement. And then complementary to that would be this last question. If you were planning the same meeting or gathering, what would you do differently to enhance the discussion or the content? This is really important in going back to something like that cone of learning to ensure that there were enough experiences or enough times for reflective times, quiet space where people can learn quietly by themselves without group interaction. All of those kinds of things become really important when planning any kind of lifelong learning event. We can make this available to you as well after today. You are lifelong learners, that's right. That's what evaluation is also about. I get third-party feedback from the ordination licensee arms of local judicatories as they certify our grads. Jill, I would keep track of that in terms of what you are hearing. It's valid information. I would keep a journal, your own journal, about what people are saying to you as third-party participants who are not in the room, but receive it from their grads. How do you compile or chart narrative replies? I was just on a project where we got 96 pages, single-spaced of replies to just one question. Yes, it is labor intensive. There is software that you can purchase if you really want to get into thematic reading in a different way. One is called Deduce. I'll put it in the chat. I'm sure I get it to everybody. And it's a way to code what you're hoping to find out through those 96 pages. So you may code something about what people are hoping to gain from your program. Depending on your outcomes, you may want to code based on your outcomes for that learning event. Deduce is a software. It takes a while to learn it. The other thing I would suggest, Jill, is giving the 96 pages to not just yourself, but maybe have a small team. And each of you read it thematically, and then come back and talk about what were the themes that each of you captured as you read those 96 pages. I just did that with a religious community. We captured some information about young women religious, and we each read a series of the same narratives, and then we came back, and it was really wonderful because it was a very rich conversation about what we heard. And in the end, we all heard essentially the same thing. But I would not put 96 pages at your feet for you to read by yourself. The more you can do it with others, the better it's going to be. And you'll get some really good conversation going as well. You had a team of 8, great. Are there any other questions we can offer you this afternoon? Answer. I will offer you one more resource. It's a book, Projects That Matter, and I'll get this to you as well after today. I'll put it in the chat. It's by Kathleen Halen, and she was in my role prior to my coming on. And the book is about successful planning and evaluation for religious organizations. It's a great book. It really is two parts. The first part is about project planning or program planning, how to put together a really good program. And the second part is how to evaluate that program. And she breaks it down into some very simple steps, into some of the questions you can ask and the methodologies you can use, and who should be involved. I'll put it back up. I don't know if you can see it. Probably not. Yeah, it is blur, Josh. So I will.
Yeah, it's the filter, so it's totally okay, but we can look
Okay,
it up on the, now that you have the title there, we can just look it up.
Yeah, Projects That Matter. It should be available. It was published by the Alban Institute many, many years ago. And it was picked up by another publisher, but I'm not sure who it is at this point. I have an old copy in front of me. Any other questions? Mary Ellen, is your hand just up from the last time? Okay, good.
Sorry, I forgot to put that down. Yeah.
I know we all do that.
So Susan, what happens when you've collected some data and you have kind of, it seems to be no consistency and it's all scattershot and there are contradictions abounding in the data? What then should you, how can you learn from that if you're trying to improve your program?
Can you give me an example, Timothy, without revealing too much?
Oh, I'm thinking sometimes people will have a program and there'll be 3 different kinds of activities. And for 25%, one activity was worthless. For 30%, that was the best thing. And then cycling through all that. So you don't really have a sense about the sort of the efficacy of any one of the pieces, because it seems to be so random, you know?
Yeah. What that suggests to me, Timothy, and I think all of you are pretty aware of this, is that everyone has different learning styles. Some people are very visual learners and love the artistic stuff that you can do in the room. Other people just want to hear it and write it down. Other people want to hear it and reflect. They want to hear it and give them time to think about it, reflect on it, maybe even journal about it. So I think part of it, what it would suggest to me, just the brief information you gave me, is to capture in advance what kind of learners do you have in the room? What's their preference? How do they like to learn? And if you could capture that through registration or any kind of pre-profile, that will help you design the program in a way that appeals to everyone. And in most cases, you're not going to please everybody all the time. I think we all know that, especially on Zoom, where we can't really connect with people in a very relational way. And you can't break people into groups. Well, we could if we wanted to, with the Zoom rooms, but I would really be curious about the kinds of learning styles that are in that room with you. Other questions? Or anything that has worked for you that you'd like to share with the group today? Well, I would like to say, first of all, especially those of you who are going to be involved with Pathways in some way, I am available to you to work on a one-on-one to help you with your evaluation planning. I would encourage you to look for Kathleen Cahalan's book, Projects That Matter. I think it really breaks evaluation down very easily. And think about a theory of change as much as possible. so that you capture the essence of your program in front of you, from learning to action to the conditions that you hope to change over time.
You muted,
Anything
Joshua.
else? Thank you, Josh, and thank you, everyone. Stay in touch, and my best wishes to all of you and all your good work.